Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Talk Architecture Podcast and also YouTube channel to explain about sensory driven principles in architecture. And so we had a couple of podcasts and videos on YouTube where it's kind of long. So I'm going to explain the lowdown quickly to integrate sensory driven architecture principles that I mentioned then with universal design and accessibility principles, which has to do with designing for disabled persons at all categories. I know I don't like categories, but physically disabled, sensory disabled, intellectually, mentally disabled, developmental, that is, and also other disabled persons. Okay, I'm not going to say differently able because that is the term that I use, disabled persons, based on United Nations. So let us get on with it. So the first thing I'd like you to know is that the sensory driven principle number one is sight, visual engagement. And we're going to see the definition here from literature search, in which we're going to go and look at it in detail and how it's interpreted for persons with disabilities. It says that you need to design spaces with thoughtful use of light, color, form, and spatial composition to create visually stimulating and harmonious environments. This includes natural light, shadow play, and visual connections to the surroundings. At the extreme, you have a blind person who is non-sighted. They can't, use the vision. How would all these principles help them? So very minimally. Perhaps that there is some vision in terms of seeing forms and shapes. So lighting is very crucial. So you have those partially sighted persons who can, during a bright day, they can see quite clearly and negotiate the space themselves. But when it's dark at night, they can't really make out things. So this visual engagement is still crucial for the everyday life to go about. So for someone who can see clearly, sighted persons, obviously you can do a lot of stuff to get visual engagement using light, color, form, and spatial composition. Now, there is also this sense of visualizing inside your mind for a blind person. That's why I would like to argue that a blind person could be an architect if they use the other faculties and other senses to actually understand what architecture is. So there's a sense of space around them in which they could move around and orientate themselves in the space. So hence you can understand about the form and somehow, cool to the touch or warm to the touch sort of material. And that is also bordering on the tactile experience for them, which is more of what they could do to actually get information about their environment. So I'm just going down quickly here on the sensory driven principles so that I can also try to define them from a disabled person's perspective. And so here, the next one is sound, which is acoustic harmony. Now, crafting acoustic experiences through material choices and spatial configurations that balance soundscapes, such as incorporating elements that dampen noise and enhance desired sounds like water features or natural echoes right off the bat. I would think that persons who are autistic, who has problem with extreme noise or noisy areas, would be benefiting from this the most. Of course, when you talk about deaf persons, they can't hear, therefore, it doesn't matter. Maybe in terms of vibrations in the concert hall, they could appreciate, or maybe something to reverb, the feeling of things are rhythmic, they could appreciate. But for hearing impaired person, this would be very beneficial that the sound is enhanced or in a way that they could hear, usually with amplifiers, but they need to have less noise background so that they could actually catch what is being said. So now crafting acoustic experiences account for a lot of us. And what is helpful is that we don't actually only using our vision, we actually try to use more of our ears and our listening powers. So that is one of the things that is important to note. Now, if I would just like to say here that I was in a group dynamic workshop situation with some of the participants being deaf people. They would read with their vision what is happening. So you see, the first one, visual engagement just now, would be very important because they would be the first one who would discern, yeah, among the participants, they would be the first one who would discern if something is wrong somewhere in terms of that other people, other friends, participants have a bit of stress. Like that's what happened to me. So I was really thinking about how visual engagement, number one, would help a deaf person more than ever. So when you talk about sound, acoustic harmony, a blind person would appreciate it a lot because there'll be less noise and more of clarity or clear acoustic reverberation or whatever you called it that could, you can actually discern it very well. For a blind person, that is a diamond, that is jewel. They love audio files and things that would help them understand and give them the information for them to get around life, to get around the situation. So, dampen noise and enhance desired sound is important for a lot of people in people who are disabled. And we're talking about what helps the disabled person also help other people. So the third one is touch, tactile experience. I mentioned just now with regard to how that will be helpful for the blind person and everybody else, except for maybe a person who can't feel much. But most of us could. The skin is the biggest organ in our body. So we could even feel a space through our senses, from our sense of touch, sense of feeling, through our body with the space. So, what is the definition here? Using textures, materials, and surfaces that invite physical interaction, such as smooth, rough, warm, or cool finishes, to evoke tactile sensations and connect users with the space. So, here we go. In terms of tactile experience, I have tried sometimes to actually close my eyes and go about touching stuff and negotiating my space when it's dark, because I have experienced vision impairment on the right side of my eye due to some sort of illness. And suddenly I was scared about being blind, but I had to understand more about tactile. And when we as architects touch surfaces, and we tend to go around touching surfaces when we go and visit buildings, and other people do that as well, and the cool material that we use would be appreciated more. So we go to the fourth one, which is a smell or olfactory design. Now, smell is defined this way for sensory driven principles, integrating elements that engage the sense of smell, such as plants, ventilation systems, or materials with distinct scents to evoke memories and create a specific ambiance. Definitely, when we talk about smell, we talk about um, being in a space where there is distinct smells, of course, sense of smell, and often is to do with emit those plants that emit such smell. Jasmine, or certain plants, a rose bush, or I'm lots of words here, but I'm sure you know many. And with tactile and with sense of smell, you could have a sensory garden, a beautiful sensory garden, or use nature and plants in architecture design as well. So you could orientate yourself with the sense of smell. For a blind person, they would use that as well, and all of us would use that as well. And that is something that is crucial. And the biggest memory is felt by the sense of taste. You eat something and it reminds you of childhood or not, or something special. And that's why people go for food a lot. And so it is together with a sense of smell that you could actually have the sensation and the valuable memory that make it enjoyable, the space enjoyable, and the activities, of course. Now we go to number 5, which is temperature or thermal comfort. Uh, so this is described as designing for thermal perception through passive heating, cooling, or material choices that respond to climate, ensuring spaces feel comfortable and responsive to human touch and presence. Now, how is it for a disabled person? For a disabled person, it's just like for a non disabled person, because having a comfortable space to work or to enjoy in means that the temperature is not too high or too low. I've been in spaces where I can't do much work because it's so cold and my hands even feel numb. So it's just that it's a very supportive environment. And what happens in a temperate climate is different than what happens in a tropical climate. And me being in tropical climate now, I would, feel good about having a good, comfortable thermal comfort and with well ventilated spaces that doesn't necessarily need air conditioning, because sometimes air conditioning is bad for your nasal passages, and you get sinuses and all that. So that is one of the things that is very basic, in which having comfort in a given temperature situation. The next one is movement or kinesthetic awareness. Now, that's a sensory driven architecture, meaning creating spaces that encourage dynamic interaction, such as a fluid circulation paths, varying ceiling heights, and spatial transitions to guide the body through the environment intuitively. For a certain type of buildings like museums or uh, galleries, where you also want different volumes of space to put in different sculptures and paintings, it's a form of space that is you experience as a user, that you feel the different transitions in the space, and it makes you kind of glad and happy that it's not monotonous, but only for certain typical types of building. I would imagine that if you were to visit a public building or even a hospital, that would help the monotony as well and the boredom, and hence the usage of double volumes and triple volumes would help enhance the experience of going to the space. I recall the Singapore library was designed with a huge, uh, I think, triple or four-story volume, which helped to create a sense of place. So that's one of the things when you try to create a community area or the place where you enter to have uh, high volume, because you come up from an area which is there is no volume, which is the outside. Um, so that is important for you to feel a sense of place in that um, sensory driven architecture principle. So the seventh and the last one is emotional resonance or human centered experience. This is particular to certain types of buildings, especially religious buildings. Designing with empathy to evoke emotional responses means a sense of, a sense of happiness or a sense of humbleness. Well, you can get a sense of fear and sadness, but that's not a good thing, isn't it? But what we want to achieve is harmony and not to terrify people. fostering a sense of belonging, calm, or inspiration by aligning the space with human needs, cultural context, and sensory balance. These spaces are to do with the spiritual essence of the place, maybe genius loci as well, when you think about phenomenology. So, here bringing into focus a space that helps you to have a certain feeling where you can connect to the space. And the only way is that there is some emotion in which you want to achieve, which is love, which is feeling of happiness. So if you have hope and desire in you to actually want to pray or want to get something spiritually, this is a very good principle to have. And it's not necessarily to do with the building, because, praying, or maybe as someone who prays outdoors, over on a bridge, over a stream in the middle of the jungle, I could feel the sense of awesomeness, or a sense of humbleness when I do so, because coupled with my activity that I'm trying to have that emotion, it makes a whole lot of difference. So the principles draw from the idea that architecture should engage all senses to enhance human experience, and emphasize in the works of like Johanni Palasmas, The Eyes of the Skin, which critiques the dominance of visual design and advocates for multi-sensory approaches. So this is a recap of the talk that I did recently for the AIA International Southeast Asia Symposium last week on 12th of September. And I want to have a shout out to New Formation Architects, Pon Amna Emer, for lending me this photo of the TNB headquarters as my background. With that, I would like to thank those listening on podcasts. I hope that you would benefit from it, and also those on YouTube through my verbal presentation. Thank you very much. This is Naziaty Mohd Yaacob, thanking you all for listening.